What up? I've been living in a garage. I'm a big man now, just graduated college last week. So let's get back into it. This tutorial is not for basic cliche, like royalty-free music. This is current meta tech for music charting and being played out today. A lot of tutorials are filled with irrelevant advice, so I wanted to make a video about actual processes that current producers are using in their songs to get the sound that we hear today. This video is a breakdown about EQ. The goal is to provide a solid understanding of what EQ is and its current role in music production. With this approach, I'm hoping that you will treat EQ as a tool that you can use to achieve certain sound or goals and not just a default preset in your chain. All right, so let's talk about EQ. Let's open up a 3x oscillator real quick. Now, if we open up a EQ, you can see that you can click on different keys. So let's just do B3. Now let's open up the piano roll and see what happens when we hit our B3. Directly right there. So look, the first thing we need to realize is that all notes are frequencies. Everything is frequencies. And this B3 is around 247 hertz. Hertz stands for cycles per second. So if we look at this sine wave right here, it would start right here and go down and then up, and then it would complete one cycle right here. So if it took 1 second to do this whole cycle, then it would be at 1 hertz. So notes are frequencies, and EQ does not add new frequencies. So the notes that we play and the way we set our beats up is going to do a lot more than what EQ will do. And that took me a while to understand. Back when I was a kid making future bass music, I always noticed other producers like super saws and stuff like just sounded way better than mine. And I always thought that was a sound design issue or an EQ issue. I just wasn't good enough. But in reality, I was approaching the whole situation wrong because they were just adding super fat chords with lots of notes and lots of frequencies to make it sound like good and thick and full. So if you want a heavier mix, you're gonna have to have a lot of low notes. I also see a lot of people trying to find like harsh frequencies in their melody and just cutting way too much of it. And instead of trying to do that, let's say this note right here is the one that sounds bad or is painful, just try literally lowering the volume of them. I also see just a lot of people cutting all of their lows from their melodies. And, instead of doing that, maybe just try going into your melody first and deleting the low notes that you don't need. Now, if you had two different things playing out over each other and they were conflicting, then that's when you bring out the EQ. A lot of times, though, you can also just turn one of them down. If your melody needed more high end, then try adding higher notes or a new lead or some cymbals to fill up that space. Don't just boost the hell out of the highs on the melody. Now, it's important to say you can't just rely on one or the other, but this is what comes first. You can boost frequencies to make them sound more full, but at the end of the day, what you're working with is what's gonna allow the outcome that you have in mind. And yeah, you know this, but I want you to really know this. That's the great thing about mixing your own beats. You can always go back into your own FLP, tweak things, add things, take them away or whatever. Let's look at this MIDI my homie Ika cooked up for us. And so how are we gonna make it sound, better and more full? We add more notes. So we're going from this to this. And EQ is not going to do that. So notes are essentially frequencies determined by their speed of vibration. So when we pitch something up or down, what we're doing is actually tweaking its frequency. Instead of using EQ to try to force things into place, getting the pitch right from the start will make a huge difference in your mix. I know that pitching things up or down is not EQ, but I want you guys to realize that I pretty much see it that way. That's why auto-tune is so popular and important in making music, because it takes all those frequencies and pitches them into the right place within the context of the mix. All right, so let's look at a little example I made. And the drums just aren't sounding like they're in the right place, really. So what I'm gonna do is just go into these drum samples and just start pitching them up until they sound like they're in the right space. And the hats were definitely way too, clicky. And for stuff like this, it doesn't need to be perfect semitones or octaves or whatever. We can just really just do it to what sounds the best for you. And, do this while you're listening to the whole thing in context, of course. All right, so with no EQ or nothing on these drum samples, we're going from this to this. This sounds like way better to me. And, when you guys get this stuff down, then that's a big level up in your beats. So yes, drum samples can be in a key, especially like hyperpop snares and stuff. You have to make sure to tune those. Just because it's not an instrument doesn't mean it doesn't have its like rightful place in the mix. The same goes for kicks and like FX samples. You got to get those right. I like to stick to around plus or minus 1 to 5 semitones when pitching stuff. If whatever I'm working with isn't sounding good after I do that, then I'll grab or look for a new sample, whether it be higher or lower. So let's go back to the 3 times oscillator example. This is also telling us a lot about sound selection. Where in the mix is your melody? What kind of bass are you using? If your melody is super high pitched, all like or whatever, you can use a low, something like this, or something low like this. And if you have like a really low pitched melody, then that's when you can grab a snare or clap like this. If you want to use super crazy distorted bass, then what you can do is, use shorter and quieter hats in the high end. The same goes for 808s, especially with the key in this scale. 808s hit a lot harder in certain notes and it just won't sound good in certain lower notes. So if that's the case, you're gonna have to find a different 808 or use like a synth type bass. There's a reason a lot of club music, is in the same key. It's because that E note, that F note, that D note, and that A note just hit a lot harder than other keys. It's pretty cool. A lot of old club songs, I guess, the way they would mix the 808s and stuff is they would stem out each different 808 note that gets hit within the song, and then they would add them to different channels and mix and EQ and process them differently, which is pretty dope because, sometimes just one certain 808 note or whatever in the mix just won't hit, and that's a pretty cool solution. So I want you guys to listen to your favorite songs and start to listen for what and where the drums or samples are used. What kind of melody is it? What kind of bass is used? Now let's go back to EQ, and you guys really got to stop doing this to all of your melodies. This is going to take away so much power and energy from your beats if you're doing this to everything. Mixing isn't like Tetris. Things are supposed to overlap a little bit. And, a lot of times the overlapping is what will make your 808s hit harder. Instead of doing this, I want you guys to try to use this more, the shelf. I'm telling you, this is sauce. Like this over the high pass will also make things feel like more full and even like wider, even though it has nothing to do with a stereo. There are so many tutorials online where they tell you to like high pass everything. And what you guys gotta realize is that these tutorials aren't for mixing or even making beats. Other genres where you need like really tight low end are completely different. And other genres don't use 808s and stuff like that either. You also gotta realize like a lot of these mixing videos online, especially like now, like are just people repeating information that they've heard and don't really understand, or like they're like internet money or something. You guys really got to be careful with like the mixing videos that you watch online. They can like really mess you up. Even if they're like a notable like YouTube engineer or something, like a lot of them just are very opinionative and just have like shit taste, to be honest. And if you don't really like understand exactly what they're saying, then like you're not going to pick up on that and think what they're saying is like what it is, which no. And of course, like different genres and stuff. So again, I want you guys to listen to your favorite songs and really listen to the low end. not just the bass, the melodies and stuff, and really listen to how much low end you can get away with and how like more quality it sounds. Because I guarantee you they're not going to be doing this to everything in the mix. But EQ is situational and depends on the context. Now, there are definitely times where, you should use a high pass filter. For example, like instruments like guitars and pianos have subsonic frequencies in the lows that you cannot hear. And even though you can't hear these, they're still going to get processed. And so the levels of them will be higher than actually perceived. So cutting these lows will actually free up more headroom for you to work with. Having or freeing up headroom allows other elements in the mix together to become louder without distorting. And that low end, for this example, will definitely take away from your bass and stuff if you don't cut it. The same goes for reverb. That stuff takes up like a lot of headroom. So that's why, like, if you're trying to make something and you got a bunch of reverb on different stuff, it's going to be very hard when you're mastering it to get it to sound like loud and good, if you've ever run into that problem. It's the same also when you're adding a lot of saturation or distortion. I'll cut those out because saturation and distortion actually does add new frequencies that weren't there before. And of course, like vocals too, I'll for sure, be high passing those. So much stuff can get picked up. But this is about beats. So other times I'll use high pass filters is if like I have like a high pitched lead I really want like floating above the main melody, I'll do that. Or for like effects samples, sometimes depending on how you're getting them or making them, they can have some stuff you don't want, but it just really depends. If it's good, then try using the shelf first. It'll be way better. Or if I have like a pretty shitty sample like I found and sampled from something, and I want to process it and change it up, then I'll do that too sometimes. But it really just depends though. There's been a couple times where just like one effects sample or something is just ruining the entire mix, and it would just take me hours to figure out, and I'd be like, oh, what the hell? There's, it sounded fine, but there's just a bunch of stuff that did not need to be there, and it was affecting everything else. But the thing is, like most VSTs and everything that you're gonna be using, they're not gonna have those subsonic frequencies. So, you don't gotta go crazy like that. With all that, let's look at another example. Me and my bro, Galaxy, have been working on a one-shot pack, and this is one of them. Emotegi just pulled up, it looks like. I just hooked him up with my drum kit for $70. I guess he's starting like a real-life band, so hopefully we'll get something dope out of it. All right, let's get back to it and listen to our melody. And hear how much bass and how much low end is in this melody. Like that's a lot of low end, and it's not even in the mixer. Nothing in here in this whole project is in the mixer except for this one effects sample with just EQ and reverb. So let me know if these 808s are hitting or not. I fell off, but this the comeback. And I'm back at my parents' house. All right, so cuts or boosts. Well, they're actually the same, and this really blew my mind when I found this out. So let's say you cut the mids of something, and then it gets quieter when you're mixing, so you're gonna turn it up. We'll just use this for example. So you boost it back up into the place where it was before. What you're actually doing is boosting all of the other frequencies. Now, the same goes for, let's say, if we're boosting the mids, and then now, you gain a couple decibels, so you got to turn it back down into place. You're actually cutting all of the other frequencies that you're not boosting. So cutting the lows will pretty much boost the highs, and cutting the highs will also boost the lows. And it's always a good idea to keep that in mind when you're doing any sort of EQ. When I'm EQing melodies or whatever, I like to stick to around plus or minus like 1 to 5 dB. Just a couple dB can really go a long way. I like to think about it like a picture. You know, you can only zoom in so much before it starts to lose its quality. And if you zoom too far out or cut away too much from it, then it starts to lose its form. And just like pictures, it's important to start with like a quality, high resolution photo. I used to think EQ could really fix anything and make it sound quality and professional, but you know, that's not, there's only so much you can do. Regardless of the tools you have, you know, some things just can't really be saved like that. Like that one guitar sample that just has way too much harsh resonances, you know, and you can sit there and just try to find, you know, and cut them all out. But then eventually, you know, you'll have like way too many shit going on, and then you'll A/B it, and then all of a sudden you realize that it sounded better before you even did anything. And whenever I'm doing any sort of cuts or boosts, I'm always, you know, resetting it, listening to the other elements, mainly the bass. I'm always seeing if the bass hits harder or it just hits less hard. And if it hits less hard, then I'm gonna do something else. Remember, most samples and recordings are already EQ'd, and there's no bringing that back. All right, now let's talk about Q factors. So using sharp, low Q factors are gonna be more for surgical things. The changes will be more focused and pronounced. It's more for fixing specific issues or enhancing very specific parts of the frequencies. Higher Qs are going to be more smooth and natural sounding. So it's good for tone shaping, like adding warmth or clarity. By the way, analog curves have high Q values like this. So if you wanted to emulate an analog EQ, then your curves would look like this and only just a couple of bands. Smooth and round curves are analog, just like this. Soft clippers are analog. Can you guess what a hard clipper would be? It'd be digital. This would be analog, 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 and then we're getting digital, 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 crazy. Also, a Q value of 1.414 is equal to the bandwidth of one whole octave. And if you wanted half an octave, then just times that by 2, and then that would be 2.828, and so on for whatever you want. And there's some pretty crazy math equations around this stuff if you guys are into that. So I know I just said I like to stick to around plus or minus 1 to 6-ish decibels when EQing, but there are definitely some other cases. There's some pretty cool sound design stuff that you can do with an EQ. Like you can take any sort of ambience and make it into like a pad or a drone. Like we have this forest ambience right here. And, you know, we can just go in and like find a chord that we want, whatever chord this is, and then take these notes and put them into the EQ and then start to boost them. You know, that's like a melody. That's pretty dope. I think you'd put some gross beat on it. I don't know, you can do some pretty cool stuff, and it like works with anything really. Some bubbles. Yeah, that's sick. And this is, I'm just two speeding it and then just mixing it in a little bit so it adds like another layer. Not this drastically, but you can also like boost and key frequencies of like a vocal or something to make it sound good sometimes. You can also boost or cut a lot more when you're using shelves, whether it be for the low end or the very top high end. I've seen people go crazy with this. Let's look what I'm doing with shelves for this bass on just like a WIP I'm working on. So we're boosting it like 4.1 decibels, and then again, we're gonna boost it another 4.5 and but again, you know, it's situational. Like for this, I want it to be a little, you know, messed up or whatever. So it just really depends. All right, now on the topic of EQing bass, I want to warn you guys about high passing kicks or 808s. I do not do this to any of my 808s, kicks, or even masters anymore. Even though you can't hear under 20 hertz, doesn't mean it still doesn't carry weight to the song. If you were to do that, I would maybe use it on a synth bass or like a Reese bass, but it really depends on how you're using it. But for hard hitting beats with 808s, you're still gonna wanna have that low end. And you can look at or analyze your favorite hard hitting songs in like Span or something, and you'll see that the low end will definitely go below 20 hertz. Besides losing power, the problems with high passing bass is you can run into phase issues. Let's take this 808 and high pass it. Now let's consolidate this and look at the phase has completely changed. So when things are out of phase with each other, then they start to cancel each other out. So like we have this, and now you can barely even hear it. And so it wouldn't be this drastic, but just random things in your mix, like if you did have phase issues, they would just start to sound quiet or not hit, and you'd be like, what the hell's going on? And this is only mainly a problem in the low end, not the other frequencies. Same can happen when you're adding like chorus or like stereo winding to your bass, because you know it starts to spread them out. So different parts will start to overlap and phase cancel each other and just won't hit good and won't punch the way you want it to. This is the same with kicks. Like high passing kicks can affect the relationship it has with the 808. So like if your kicks and 808s were sounding all right, you know, and you're like, you know, it's not sounding exactly the way I want it, so I'm gonna try to high pass them to get that, to give it more space, then it can mess up the phase issues, and then it won't even sound, it'll sound worse. It can also diminish the transients of the kick and make it sound more weak or less defined. Now, I definitely have high-passed my kicks before, and it can work out, but it's really case by case. And in those cases, I'm also like mixing everything around it to make it work out. So I really want you guys to like EQ with intention. Like whenever you're doing anything, whenever you're boosting or cutting, doing whatever, high passing, low passing, you know, really think about why you're doing this. You know, I could have been like way better at mixing like way earlier on if I wouldn't have been just like mindlessly like, oh, you know, boosting and cutting things and just kind of figuring it out. And it did work. I'd get to where I wanted to be, but it just took a lot longer than I would have liked. And that really goes for like anything when you're producing or mixing. Like, why are you doing this? You know, like have an intention, walk with a purpose. Real quick, I just want to talk about this EQ right here. You know, I know a lot of people love to use it, but I just have to say I do not trust or mess with this EQ at all. I do not like it. I know it can work out for some people. Like I've gone FLP collabs and stuff for mixing, and every time I get one and they're using this EQ, the first thing I do is just reset all its parameters, and it immediately sounds better. So I would always just try to use a different EQ. But that's just me. What works for you works for you. But I don't trust this dude. It's also important to know that all EQs are going to act and sound a little bit differently. For example, Pro Q3 has plus and minus 30 dB. Fruity Parametric EQ is plus and minus 18 dB. The default curves are different, and the mathematical equations and algorithms behind them are different too. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about high end in your beats. I've seen so many producers just boost the hell out of everything in the high end to make it sound better. It's like everybody is scared of cutting the highs, but it actually makes sense because of the way that EQ is laid out. No EQ graph is actually in scale. I mean, look at it. Here from 20 to 50, look how big of a gap it is. But then from, you know, 5K to 10K, look how small it is. That should be way longer. The way it looks, it seems like you can do a lot more in the lows and the mids than the highs, but you can get away with cutting way more highs. Remember, these beats that we're making, they're meant to have a vocalist on them. I've heard like a lot of beats that are just, no one's gonna be able to hop on them because they just have a lead filling up all of that high-end space, so there's just no room for anyone to even get on. And this is like a tough balance because, you know, you're making the beat and, you know, it's gonna sound better with your lead and stuff. You know, like we want the vocals to shine. We want to make a good song. So, you know, just be conscious of that. Quick little trick you could do to make some space for vocals is just whatever elements does have a lot of high-end, melodic wise mainly, just try to cut like, you know, just 1 decibel from around 1000 hertz, and that can help free up a lot of space. All right, let's look at some drain examples. So let's look. Look at that. It's all cut around 6K. 6K, bro. And it doesn't sound like there's not a lot of highs in this. And then look at, right when he breathes in, then you have, that's how it sounds so good, because there's space for the vocals. Now let's look at this one. Look at, we got, again, around 5K. And here's another one. Look at, and you can see where the vocals are. And I don't want to get in trouble for that, but you know what I'm saying? So don't be scared of cutting the highs. Everyone's out here just boosting the hell out of them. And then you can pull up like a big boy, and no one will even realize what you're doing. Something so simple. All right, so that's it for this video on EQ. I hope you guys liked the video. If you guys learned something new and are hyped on it, the best way to help me out would just be running me up on Insta or something. That way I can get bigger placements. So, all right, peace. We back.